Caliban'S War, the sequel to Leviathan Wakes, which is probably ranking among one of my favorite sci-fi stories of the modern era. I loved Leviathan Wakes, the kickoff to the Expanse, so the bar was set really high for this one, right? Because I loved Leviathan Wakes, and it showed a level of storycraft that I just respected immensely. So coming into Caliban'S War, I was geared up, I was ready to go once again. And I may have had my expectations a bit too high, because writing a sequel is difficult, although I don't think the things affecting this book are necessarily due to sequel slog. I just don't think it's on the level we had before. But there's positives and negatives, and still overall I really did enjoy this book. But let's get into the pros and cons of Caliban'S War. Starting with a con. So Leviathan Wakes, to me, one of the big appeals was there's this constant twists and turns of the narrative. We're doing rights and lefts all over the place, and I found it very hard to predict where that story was going to go. Caliban'S War does not have that same advantage, and that's a big hook of the first book that just doesn't exist here, and kind of just disappointed my expectations. So if you don't have that, you might actually not be disappointed in this way, but for me it just kind of was And the basic setup of the premise here is we have a massacre occurring at the beginning of the book, and James Holden and his crew are called into the aftermath to help look for a missing girl. On the flip side of that, the B to this A story is we have a survivor, a witness to what occurred, who is summoned to a grand political council to recount events, and we kind of get a more political aspect of the world over on that side. It seems like a good setup. You have a more action-y, we're trying to track down this child and slowly uncovering grand conspiracy side, and a intense political thriller over here. The disappointment comes in with the tense political thriller side seems rather basic politics. Like, I have high bar for a series like this when it comes to presenting politics to me, the reader. The enjoyment comes from the, oh, I could never have seen that coming, but it seems totally in character of this person to do that. They just outsmarted even me in my predictions. Nothing even close to that level. This is basic politics. Like, you're gonna see everything coming, and it's kind of just Starbucks drinking Valley Girl from California, basic politics. Hey, yeah? Hey, you. Yeah, my people don't want what you want. Well, my people don't want what you want. Okay, well, f*** you. I'm gonna do things to make sure you don't get what you want. F*** you. F*** you too. Politics. Politics. And that entire side of things, I did not enjoy narratively a whole lot. I liked one thing it did do for this universe, which is, you know, the Expanse as a whole feels like a very large pond with murky water, and I can't really see the gears turning because I can't see past my own little fins. That side of the story, though, definitely cleared up that water a little bit. I understand the politics of the background to the stories we follow with, like, James Holden better as a result of this other plot over here. I just didn't enjoy this other plot as a whole that much. Now, as for James Holden's story and his crew going about this conspiracy, finding elements from the last book, a MacGuffin reappears and they're trying to figure out how it got out, you know, all this stuff, pretty good. Not as good as Leviathan Wakes. Again, just structurally, investment, you know, all these things did not pull me in like Leviathan Wakes accomplished. That being said, one element here I found to be much greater than actually the previous book was actually the development of the characters. In the first book, it very much so felt like we're just meeting these established characters, and while they certainly have realizations about themselves, they're not exactly developing and changing much. The character lens for this story, for me, much more focused on watching how they changed, you know, how they adapt to the extreme circumstances and what they've been through up until this point. And that was a big add-in hook that the last book didn't have as much. Now, we already know the characters, so we don't get kind of joy of getting to know them. That's not as prevalent as it was in the last book, except for a couple new characters here. But overall, the appeal for character here was actually more up my alley because the relationship and character development was on the next level. And that is so crucial for the Expanse to work as a whole, right? With a story this big, with this many factions moving against each other, to ground your reader, there needs to be characters they understand, they relate to, connect with, at the center of it. And that's never been weak in the Expanse, at least in these first two books for me. I am connected to these characters, and I'm invested in their survival as they navigate this chaotic environment with all these not necessarily good-intentioned groups moving against each other. And I still very much so enjoy James Holden as a character. Recently on a live stream on Murphy Napier's channel, I joked with Tim from Hello Future Me that James Holden feels like a boomer hero to me, and that wasn't a criticism. I actually think that's a really appealing angle, and it just means, like, if I was going to recommend The Expanse or Caliban'S War to my dad, I would be very, very confident he would like this character, because he just has the appeal that I think that older generation looks for, while also still being appealing to a newer reader like myself. He's just a well-done character, and I like him overall. But yes, as a character, he's still structured in a way which I think definitely harkens back to the Protagonist maybe an older generation is used to. And actually, a rather big praise I would like to give both Leviathan Wakes and Caliban's War here is they almost read like individual books. Like, I feel like I could give book 1 to one person and book 2 to another, both who have never read the series before, and they would really enjoy each book. Maybe Leviathan Wakes a bit more, but if the bar isn't set too high, which Leviathan Wakes does, you could still love Caliban's War. And that's because I think the two authors who came together to write these books very much so focus on structuring each story to have a very complete feeling at the end. Yes, there are little nuggets dropped in to keep you hooked and interested for the next entry. Of course, they're going to do that, but you're never unsatisfied. Like, I can put down Leviathan Wakes and say I'm satisfied with that, and the exact same feeling after this one as well. I was like, oh, that felt like a complete story. And if it's just the first book, maybe that's because they weren't sure they're going to get a sequel deal. So a lot of books that are the first in a potential series are written that way. You know, they're written in a way where you can go, oh, okay, I'm done, I'm good, cool. That's just in case they aren't able to do book 2. But they did it again here in book 2, and I actually really appreciate that. And I actually think that might have fought against some of the issues that could have arisen in terms of sequel slog. Those issues weren't really prevalent here at all, except for maybe the slower pacing, and having such a firm, oh, okay, we're done now feeling at the end just had a lot of advantages here. So one last weakness I want to get into for Caliban's War compared to the first book is the kind of just lack of compelling villains, and therefore lack of actual compelling ideas pushing against our protagonist, right? Like one of the first really interesting aspects to the themes and presentation of story in Leviathan Wakes is how there's this kind of ideological appeal to the other side. Like, you can get, without getting into spoilers, where the bad guy's coming from and go, oh, I don't agree with your methods, but you're not entirely wrong. Whereas here in Caliban's War, we don't have that at all. And I miss that foil aspect greatly. All of that being said though, I still really enjoyed Caliban's War. Like, if I had to rank each book individually, I would say Leviathan Wakes is like a strong 8.5 to light 9 out of 10. And Caliban's War just feels like a strong 6.5. Above average, certainly not bad enough for me to be like, I need to cut my ties and leave the Expanse series behind, but a definite step down. But what's strange is this book is still technically so well written, and I feel like a lot of the issues could have been resolved with just a couple more pass-throughs of the editing pen, that I still have a lot of faith book 3 could be as good as book 1, or just substantially better than book 2. You know, I don't know the story exactly behind the publication of Caliban's War, but to me this just felt a bit rushed, not as well thought out as the first entry. And so that's where a lot of the problems come in, right? Like, if I was one of the editors in this book, I'd go, you guys need to write a more compelling villain into, while keeping the basic structure of your story done, and also enhance the politics a little bit, because this feels just too predictable, too basic. If they had just made those two changes, almost all of my other issues would have just evaporated away, and you maybe wouldn't have had the page time to have some of the more boring dialogue, for lack of a better word, that Caliban's War certainly suffered from, and that really made this slower pacing that exists in this book worse. Leviathan Wakes, despite being a massive tome, never had me bored. I was never thinking this is too big, it can be cut down. Caliban's War, the slower pacing with a messier plot, not as compelling narrative, and boring dialogue made it very apparent that maybe they just needed a bit more time or a bit more editing, I'm not sure. But the characters, their relationships, and my overall already existing investment into the Expanse was enough to carry me through and still enjoy Caliban's War. There's still tons of entertaining action, really great humor at times, believe it or not, and these characters are written in this raw, real way where they're kind of in that category of like, you could follow them around doing just about anything and it would kind of inherently be compelling. Not all the time, hence the boring scenes and dialogue, but certainly enough that I never wanted to put down Caliban's War. There was never any moment where I felt the need to close or skip. It felt like it was always worth the effort. So I want to talk about one element that is certainly going to be considered quote-unquote spoilers here. So if you have not read this book and you want to avoid that entirely, especially if you've not even read Leviathan Wakes, I would click off the video just about now. 3, 2, 1, spoilers, go. The Protmolecule is introduced once again, and I'm glad it's here in a way. Like, I found the Protmolecule in book 1 to be fascinating. The stakes it raises, the, questions behind it, its cost to benefit, so fascinating. But I didn't necessarily want all of the Expanse to revolve around this thing. And now with it being in both of the first 2 books, I feel like that's being set up to be the driving conflict motivator for the whole series. So while I enjoy it and I like it being here, I maybe just wanted a bit more time before it was reintroduced because I want to get invested in other possible origins of conflict for this series. But now, yeah, there's a lot of other things set up, but really what is important and what shows to be important for maybe the grander conflict of the series, and I totally could be wrong here, I'm only on book 2, is this MacGuffin-y type object. Its usages with these quote-unquote super soldiers I could take or leave, to be frank. These zombie type things in the first book were good and they worked with the narrative, and I feel pretty much the exact same here. They're fine, they're good, they actually result in some really great action and character moments to overcome things, to beat them. Great, but I just needed this space from this plot motivator to entrench myself a bit more in the universe. Maybe this feels like a very strange complaint, but I hope people can kind of understand what I'm talking about. Like, I enjoy the Protmolecule. I'm glad it's here, and it's actually used quite well in this story, but I just, you know, we just hung out, man. We were just together. Like, I love you, bro, but I don't want to see you every day, man. Like, give it a week. Overall, though, that's my thoughts on Caliban's War. Still a solid sci-fi book, not bad by any means, just certainly more flaws and criticisms more readily apparent than the first book. So it didn't reach the bar that my mind had set, but I'm just reframing and readjusting, and hopefully the third book, which I'm still certainly going to read, is more on that first book level, or at least elevated above the issues I had here. Anyway guys, like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and have a good one, y'all. Peace! And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreon. I hope I pronounced this right. I tried for a minute to look it up, and it's Prajit Singh. I hope I got that right. Let me know if I did, buddy. Have a good one. Peace.